Welcome to the Creative Community Podcast, presented by Destination Arte. I'm David.
And I'm Mark. We're building a community of creatives who work together to achieve creative excellence. Today's guest is oil painter and art instructor, Cody Wheelock.
Cody shares with us the top 3 attitudes students can bring to the classroom to foster a healthy art community, as well as shares the best questions that art students can ask their teachers.
Cody also shares 2 big lessons he learned about his personal work from preparing to teach his students. So without further ado, let's welcome art instructor and fine artist, Cody Wheelock. Can you introduce yourself and maybe share a project or a piece that you've been working on recently?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, guys. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be on the show and chat with you. So I'm a full-time art and instructor, as you said, in Lee Summit, Missouri. So I run a little studio called Fount Atelier of Fine Art, where I teach classical drawing and painting methods using a kind of a hybrid online and in-classroom approach. And in addition to that, I, like you said, do my own oil paintings and a lot of commissions for clients, that type of thing. So right now, we're just kind of doing some planning for 2021, trying to get things in line. Upcoming events, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll have a fairly smooth year, smoother than last year, as far as health and COVID and all of that is concerned. And yeah, just kind of looking forward to the upcoming months.
Well, that's great. Maybe that's a great way to kind of segue into our first question for you, which was, if I'm an art student in 2021, or if I'm ever an art student, what is something I can do to foster a healthy art community with my classmates?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you're in a group setting, it's so important to, I think, get to know the people and build positive community with those around you, especially when you're in a class. I find that one of the, I don't know about you guys, but I was always the art kid growing up, and I was always the kid in the class that would, do all the drawings and paintings and the art guy, so it always came pretty natural to me. But one thing that I found in teaching, that art can be a extremely intimidating thing for a lot of people, because they show up to this class, they're in a group setting, people they don't know, no one wants to be that person. That's the worst person in the class, the worst person, and regardless of skills and that type of thing. And so I find that makes people really nervous, and sometimes they don't engage with others and whatnot. And so fostering that community is really important. 3 things that came to mind when I think about this question. Number 1 is to just be approachable. Just have a positive attitude when you come in. I think that, as I said, sometimes people get so in their head that they maybe might not come off very polite, I guess, or positive, I guess, to other students. So just having an approachable attitude, saying hi to everyone in the class, introducing yourself, I think is really good. And then another thing I thought about was the fact that to foster a healthy art community with your fellow classmates is to be humble. Sometimes we go into a class and, whether it's right or wrong, there's sometimes this kind of competitive nature to where it's like, well, I don't want to have the worst work. I want to have the best work, and that type of thing. And sometimes, depending on someone's mindset, it can be, that can come off a little bit rude. And so I think that just being humble, trying to make sure that you're not the person in the class that knows it all and is there to teach everyone else stuff, and just being humble with your work is really important and can really help with that. And the other thing that I thought of is just showing interest in others' work. Ask them questions about what they're doing, and instead of, it's so easy for us to kind of just stay in our little bubble when we're in a class, or when a student's in a class. But going around, checking out what other people are doing, showing it an interest, asking questions are great ways to kind of engage fellow classmates and try to build that community a little bit.
Yeah, that is like super helpful, because I love what you said about, growing up, you were always the art kid, because sometimes, when you go into an art setting, especially if it's like your first class or something, maybe, these are some of the first artists, that you're meeting, that you've ever met before. And all of a sudden, you've gone from being, the person, and now all of a sudden you're just one of 20, one of, 100. And it's like, oh my goodness, where do I stack up? Where do I go? And so that's super helpful. Those three things are super helpful, to be able to do that. We wanted to ask you, because oftentimes in even an educational setting, there's the opportunity to network with both students, but also sometimes professionals, or maybe the mentor that's teaching the class. So how do you kind of recommend students balance that idea of networking with students and also trying to network with professionals and mentors?
That's a great question. Think a lot of times it comes down to just asking questions. I think that when you come at things with an inquisitive type approach,
Yeah.
and you ask questions, it engages people in conversation, and it's a really nice, non-threatening way, I guess, to kind of start that networking process, as opposed to just coming up to someone and saying, "Hey, Mark, I'm doing this, and I think that you need to do it too because it works for me." It comes off a little, like a know-it-all type thing. So I
Yeah.
just think asking questions, and don't make assumptions, because
Mhm.
you never know what background the other students have in the class, what background the teacher has, and so, um, you know, just a question first approach, I think, is a great way to go.
Well, that's perfect because our next question for you was, what questions do you wish your students asked? I know every teacher sometimes is like, man, if that student would just ask me this, then I could share that with them, and I won't have to kind of come down on them and share what I want them to know. So, are there questions that you think like, man, I wish students would ask this more, or have never been asked this before?
Yeah, definitely. So, from an instructor's viewpoint, I think that the questions that I get a lot revolve around technical details, right? How do I paint this cloud and make it look fluffy, or how do I mix this color and that type of thing? And all of those types of things are super helpful, and those are all questions that students should ask. But um, one question that I bring it up with my students a lot, but it's something that I think all students um, should think about is what are the traits of a successful student? What are things that they can do, those intangible things, that can um, help make their experience a good one and a successful one. So, um, to me, those are things like being coachable. Being able to take um, a suggestion or advice and internalize it, and come to class with an open mind, things like that. So to me, it's almost finding out, just find out what that instructor is looking for in a student, and trying to kind of help bridge the gap a little bit, and whatnot. So I think that can be kind of helpful. Another thing that I'm always super excited about when students ask me about this topic is practice habits. What can
Mm.
I do when I'm not in class to kind of reinforce the things that we're talking about? Um, and what practice habits that I myself use, and that type, because really, you guys, the key to improving is that practice time, and quality practice time.
That's super helpful, because um, oftentimes it can be, with the instructor student relationship, there is so much exchange of information, that it can be like, oh, I don't even know. Like, I feel like he's already told me so much already or something, but you do have those questions. And is that like something that you would just say, like, if you have an instructor, just go up to them after class and ask, just be like, hey, what are some things that I could be doing after class? Is there like as a teacher, how would you advise your student, or a student, maybe not your student, because you're at that point you're already in the middle of the conversation, but a student to be like, hey, this is how to best, and your teacher's busy, this is how to kind of best approach that. How would you recommend approaching that topic of asking about practice habits?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that after a class session, after the instructional session is done, it's a great time to do that, because sometimes those types of questions aren't things that you just want to, raise your hand and bring up
Mhm.
with the large group of people. But um, you know, I think instructors love those types of questions, and when you're doing it after the fact, off to the side or whatnot, that's a great time to do it. Um, you know, always better to ask in question, but even or in sorry always better to ask in person, but
Okay.
an email after the workshop or class or something can be helpful too, or looking to set up a one-on-one video chat or something like that can be great.
I think it's good to hear that because I wish I had learned that earlier as a student because I always thought I don't want to be that person that's always either bothering the teacher or, um, you know, being the teacher's pet. They're always hanging around the teacher, always. But in reality, those are the people that end up learning the most because they're communicating with the teacher. They know what the teacher's looking for. They know what the teacher's expecting and what they're going to be grading. And, they know like the more you communicate with a teacher, the more teacher knows what level you're at as well. And so sometimes as an artist, maybe you're not at the level you think you should be, but when you go to your teacher and say, "Look, this is everything I've done and this is where I'm at." Then when it comes to at least in a school setting, it's hard to put a letter grade on art, sure, but at least in a school setting, the teacher looks at what you've turned in and says, I don't know, maybe you can back me up on that, Cody, or you can say, no, that's completely false. But have you ever had students where they communicated with you, and so when you finally got their piece turned in, you said, okay, I see where you're coming from and the struggles you were having?
Oh yeah, absolutely, because you know each piece of art that a student does not exist in isolation.
Mm.
There's always context to it, and so I think that the more information an instructor has, the better that he or she will be able to help that student out. And you make a great point about just the importance of communicating and engaging with the instructor. My favorite classes to teach taught, and it doesn't matter if it's little kids, teenagers in a high school setting, middle school students, adults, senior citizens. My favorite classes to teach are those where my students are engaged and participating and asking questions, because that makes it fun for the instructor. The last thing a teacher wants to do is to come into a studio or classroom setting and have everyone just stare at you stone faced, and no one raises their hand and no one wants to ask questions, and that it just makes that awkward silence, and no teacher likes that. And so the more engaging a student can be, the better. And you're right, you're not gonna bug a teacher, by asking questions. And even if you feel like your questions are dumb, or that type of thing, it's instructors love to teach. Teachers love to teach. That's why they do it. If an instructor was just going to go talk to a bunch of blank faces, then you might as well just send out a video of the instructor talking, because you're really negating the benefit of being in a class.
That's super cool because I remember I was sitting in a class and I was thinking, and I turned to the person next to me and I said, "What's so?" I said, "Everything that we're learning in here, we could learn on YouTube." It was just a basic fundamental
Sure.
art class, and I was like, "So what? So why are we here? Like, why are we here and not there?" And I was like, "Because of the students that are in this class that I'm going to build a relationship with, and because of the knowledge that that teacher has, that that individual teacher has, that that guy on YouTube doesn't have, that experience, that knowledge, that ability to interact." And I was like, and that changed from then on. Like that just changed my college experience because I was like, from then on, it was just all about like, okay, I'm not just here to build like a library of information. I'm here to build a library of relationships. And that was like just super cool. So it's super cool to hear you talk about that from the teacher's perspective, where you're like, yeah, I'm also here to build the relationship with the student. I'm not just here to like you said, stare at a bunch of blank faces, and say information. That's awesome.
And hey, you guys know this as well as I do. Not every instructor is built the same, and I'm sure that some students out there have run across, kind of stinker instructors that are act like they don't want to be there, or grumpy, which I always thought was interesting, because why do you teach if you don't want to interact with students, and if you don't enjoy it? But um, along those lines, don't let one bad experience kind of taint your overall view of art classes, because you know you're going to run into that from time to time. But I know students that have had bad experiences and have told me, with other instructors, and told me, I didn't take another art class for 5 years because I had such a bad experience with that one instructor. And so you know I would really encourage students to do some background research into a class that they're taking and into the instructor, and try and learn a little bit more about them, and try and make sure that instructor is a good fit for them, so that it is someone that they'll enjoy being with and they can converse with and talk to and learn. But you make a good point about the YouTube thing. It's interesting, isn't it? Because today you can learn just about anything that you want off YouTube, but you do miss that relational component. Um, and I also think there's something to that accountability piece too.
Ooh.
It's really easy to just watch a video and say, "Oh yeah, don't worry. I'll get to that next week and work on it." But how many people ever do? But if you have a person standing 3 feet away from you, or in today's world, 6 feet away from you, and they're telling you, uh, you know, "Hey, you should do this and you should do this," I think there's a little bit more gumption behind that, if you will.
Well, that's what I like to say. I can look on YouTube and figure out how to take that car part off, or my dad can come over and tell me if you put your foot here and you twist just a little bit, then you can get more leverage on. Because the YouTube video
Hmm.
cuts and then that bolts off of there, and I'm like, well, I
Right.
can't get it off.
Yep.
But the teacher sits there and says, okay, so you're doing this and you're so close. You just need to change this one thing. Whereas, you're watching a YouTube video, the guy just kind of clips to the next. Okay, now that we've painted that cloud, we're on to the next. And not that there's anything wrong with happy little trees, just there's, like you said, there's something about that relationship and understanding where that student is. That it's really helpful.
We've talked a lot about, like, kind of the student teacher relationship in terms of exchanging information. And we wanted to also ask you about kind of how your personal art has changed since you've become a teacher. So we just wanted to ask, what's the biggest thing that you have implemented in your personal art that you discovered while teaching someone else?
Yeah, sure. Well, one of my favorite parts of teaching is that you learn just as much, if not more, through the process of teaching, and designing a program and a curriculum and whatnot, as the students do. So, uh, you know, you get a lot out of it. So, a few things that come to mind are, I mentioned it a little bit ago, but that accountability piece. Um, you know, Now, I work with my students on a weekly basis, so I build relationships with them. And it's great because not only am I able to hold them accountable to the things that we're doing in class, but they're able to hold me accountable, which is awesome. So, you know, I will openly tell students, "Hey, I'm going on a camping trip this weekend. I want to, my goal is to come back with at least two little plein air studies, and I tell my students, hey, next week, you guys ask me to show you those plein air studies to make sure I do them, because, you get out there and you get busy and you don't do them. Little things like that. I'll be working on a piece for a client, and I do all of my. I guess I should preface. My personal studio space is in the same space that I teach in. That way, students
Okay.
can always see what I'm working on, and vice versa. So, if I have a piece in progress for a client on the easel, and I tell them on a Tuesday night, yeah, next Tuesday I'm really planning on having the first layer of color put in there. Then I mean, that kind of holds me to actually doing it, right? So
Mhm.
that accountability piece on the teacher end, on my end, is important, especially when you're in a class setting, you know, where you're seeing students on a regular basis. Um, and kind of goes along with that, but my own practice habits. I personally have always wanted to be a practice what you preach type teacher and just person in general. So if I tell my students, hey, these are things that I think that you guys should be doing to improve your work, and these are the habits that I think would be helpful. Um, well, I better be doing some of those things too.
Mhm.
And how many times do you have instructors say, um, yeah, you guys should be in your sketchbooks regularly, and you should be doing this and that, and do one small study a week, and whatever else. But if the instructor's not doing it, then it's like, well, why should I do it? Because you're not doing it. And so I think that, if I can stay up on that stuff and students see that, that kind of creates a lot of buy-in on their end, and they see that, oh, these things are important. It's not just, you know, talk uh, and busy work type stuff that he's saying. So it kind of helps my own practice habits. And um, one of the things that I really like about teaching and designing a curriculum is that you have to actually think through the whole process of creating something, and think through how to explain that to someone in a way that makes sense.
Mm.
And so that also forces me to think about the projects that I'm working on. I just completed a very large commission for a client, the biggest painting that I've ever done. And because I teach a certain process, working process to my students, I think that it really helped me with this big piece for my client, because it kind of, took this big overwhelming thing and helped break it down into individual stages, and allowed me to process it better and work through each stage systematically, just like I have my students do. Um, and I think that it helped me come up with a better final product.
I love that idea of thinking through the whole process, because when you sit down in front of a blank canvas, I'm not an artist, so when I see a blank canvas, it's very overwhelming.
Mhm.
There's so many things that could go wrong with just before I even get started, which is where I've started to go wrong, is before I even get started. But to sit down and think through the whole process, uh, as a teacher, maybe try and teach yourself through the painting. That could totally, I could see that helping even someone like me that doesn't paint every day, like you two fine gentlemen do. But I I have a bonus question for you. I don't, Mark. Do you have a follow up to any of that, or?
No, no, not at all. That was really helpful to because it's almost like if you're struggling to understand a concept, like maybe as an art student, maybe you could try to explain it to one of your friends, or maybe you could
Mm.
try to, like David said, explain it to yourself, be like, all right, what are we doing here? Let's take 2 steps back. So, but I love that idea, and I have nothing to add. Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there are several times when I find, especially, like, this is really important for me when I do plein air work. I'll sit down and I'm like, all right, I have, you know, this window of time to get this thing done, right? So I'm going to sit down and I just start going at it. But because, I teach a certain process to my students to think through systematically as you get started working on a plein air piece, it forces me to think about, okay, wait a second, no, I need to go back and do this first, and then do this, and then do this, and it inevitably ends up in a better painting. So yeah, it, it's really practical.
Well, before the bonus question, I want to ask you this now, and then we'll ask the bonus question after that. What is your studio or your school? Can you tell us how to pronounce it, where to find it online, what students can expect, that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. So I always tell prospective students that if they can pronounce my studio name correctly, I'll give them a $5 discount on their tuition. But it's just atelier. So the French term atelier is just a word for studio. A lot of times it refers to in a classical art sense, a teaching studio where you have students working under a professional artist. So uh, people can find my studio and learn more about what we do at www.fountatelier.com. So for people in the Kansas City metro area, I offer in-studio classes where we go through a program called the core program that takes students from the absolute basics. In fact, the very first thing we do is we talk about sharpening pencils and how to do it properly. And then we kind of build up from there. So no experience required. And then we eventually get into full-fledged multi-layer indirect oil paintings, direct paintings, plein air work, things like that. But we start with the absolute basics. The program uses a blended or flipped model of instruction. So, in a nutshell, what that means for people that are unfamiliar with it, and this comes from my teaching background in schools, but basically every concept in the curriculum that I teach, and uh, every demonstration that I do for students, I've made instructional videos for. And I try to use good equipment and good, so it's a professional looking video. And so what I'll actually do is, prior to students coming to class, I will send them the content that we're going to cover. And so what they do is, at home, in bed or whatever, they can look at it on their iPhone and watch me explain the concept, and they can also watch me demonstrate the concept, so that when they get to class, now it's just, did you have any questions over the content that I sent you? If not, we just jump right into it and get started on the assignments. And
Wow.
so I find that makes for a very efficient use of studio time, because in today's world, if we have a 2 hour or 2.5 hour class session, and I'm standing up in front of students and just talking for 45 minutes of it, that's great. But we can do that portion of it via a video. And so
Mhm.
students kind of come primed and ready to go for class. And then we just jump right into it. And then they get the hands-on feedback from the instructor, which is the really important stuff. And that also allows us to do a self-paced approach. So I can have a room or a studio full of students that are all at different points in the curriculum, because I don't have to stand up and talk about one thing at length, and spend all my time with one student, because I've already sent out all the content to each student prior to class, so that when they get here, everyone's working on something different. Students can work as slowly through an assignment or as quickly through an assignment as they want, and they just kind of work their way through the curriculum. So that's what we do here. I also have, because I have all of that content recorded and ready to go, I also offer the entire program online through my website as well, so people anywhere can participate and send me their work, and I give them feedback. So yeah, it's kind of a fun deal.
Man, that is so cool. And we have a lot of friends. Dave and I both grew up in Kansas City, so like we have a lot of friends that are there. And it's like, if you're listening and you want to learn like traditional art, like you want to learn, like, I wish I could draw like they like I see in like the illustrations that I like, or the paintings that I like. If you want to learn how to draw, man, go see Cody. Go see him and like just get started, because it's awesome. And it's true, like he said, he will take you from like 0 to however far you want to go. Awesome.
Yeah. And if people just want to come and say hi and check out the studio, I'm more than happy to have them stop by.
Well, my bonus question has to do with Kansas City, since Mark mentioned we're from there. And this maybe you can say, you know what, that's not really my dream. This is my dream. But if the World War I Museum was to ask you to paint a piece for them, and it was going to be on display for an event, is there a scene that comes to mind, or is there like a thing that you're like, man, I wish I could paint this, or do you have a different dream maybe?
Oh, no, that's pretty cool. Yeah, the World War I Museum is a great place here in town. As soon as you say that, the one thing I think of is that a couple years ago, John Singer Sargent, his big giant painting Gast actually came from London, and they had it on display for a couple years. Did you guys see that by any chance?
I didn't.
I
Mark,
actually got to go. Yeah, I got to go while it was in town. It was probably, I mean, like I probably just made it, like to see it, but I got to stare at that thing. That thing is huge. I was like, this, like the pictures online, like dude, like they're this big, but that thing was massive and so beautiful.
Yeah. I saw it. So that happened right before we moved down here, and I just missed it. I didn't get to see it. I was so disappointed, because I would love to see it, because I love Sargent. But anyway, when you ask me that question, that's immediately what I think of, and so it's hard to measure up to that. But I think that some of the greatest paintings in history are some of these huge multi-figure compositions where, holy cow, I mean, like, it's a narrative scene with drama, and it's intense, and it's all composed super well, and it's done impeccably, so I think that a multi-figure battle scene with all this stuff going on would be really cool to do. And maybe try and pick a vantage point. When people think of World War I, they always think of the trench warfare and that type of thing, but maybe explore and come up with a unique take, a unique view that maybe people wouldn't normally see. But yeah, that would be awesome to have that.
We are so grateful to Cody for sharing his time, knowledge, and wisdom with us. You can find him at www.fountatelier.com. And Atelier is Atelier. David, it's nice to have someone else with a difficult to spell website on
That's
here.
for sure.
Or you can find him at Fount Atelier on Instagram, or his personal page, Wheelock Paintings, on Instagram.
As always, subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Stitcher, Spreaker, and Google Play for more episodes like this one, and leave us a review. That helps the algorithm know that you liked what we had to say. Feel free to share this interview with a friend that you think might benefit from Cody's information and knowledge. And leave us a comment somewhere on social media, Instagram or Facebook. We had a great response to our interview with Brian Nair. Valerie left us a comment with some very encouraging things to say, and she finished her comment with, "I think so often beginning artists are held back from creating wonderful things by the idea that great artists have done and it is not possible for them." But to see how far Brian has come by following the advice to not just admire the masters, but to strive to do even better is a testimony to the great things God can and still does empower creative people to do. That was a blessing to me to hear Valerie share that, and I hope it was a blessing for you as well.
Absolutely. And if you have something similar that you would like to share with us, connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, Destination Arete, Arete, for more interviews like this one, community activities, and upcoming Arete projects. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another interview. See you then.